Hello, everyone. Welcome to Frog Talks, the inaugural Frog Talks, the beta. We're excited. We have a huge audience. Great speakers. We wanted to bring together some movement makers, some movement doers, some thinkers, people who have great ideas in order to inspire all of us to think about movements or starting our own movement. And I want to actually ask all of you if you'll stay. I know many might need to leave. Stay to the end because we are going to launch a beer movement. And you're not going to want to miss that. It's going to be pretty awesome. So, movements. You know, we're living in the age of movements. Of course, you look around this country and around the world, we are living at a time where there are movements everywhere, all over the place. And movements are like a force. They can be a force for good, or they can be a force for evil. It's a bit like Star Wars. How you use the force depends on you. And that's important because the truth is every single one of you in this room, every single individual, every company, every brand, every entrepreneur can create a movement, can identify, crystallize, align with, and spark a mass movement that reaches deep inside people and turns them on. It's like you reach inside, you flip a switch, and you're activated. And tears just appear. And boom, everything changes. And for good or for bad, nothing is ever the same. And the reason that's important is because we're living in a world with huge challenges. And sometimes we need to stop and realize that we need to say to you, here's an idea you need to hear. Or more importantly, here is something that you need to do. Or here is something that you need to do differently. Movements are based on ideas, or emanated from ideas, but they're grounded in action. That's what we're asking people to do. And all of you are movement makers. You can be movement makers because you are dreamers of dreams. And that's where it starts. And today, this whole event is intended to inspire you. And we have some extraordinary speakers who are going to give us some really great insights. Now, this lovely creature on my right is here to remind us of our attention span. We look at the goldfish who has an attention span of 8 seconds. Human beings, we have an attention span of less than that. So the reason why we have him here is to remind us why we started Frog Talks. We want to have the shortest talks on the planet. Big movement ideas, super short and sharp talks. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the evening. It's someone I've known for many years. He's been a part of the Olympic movement for many decades. Atlanta, Salt Lake City, Beijing, Vancouver, and then a month ago in Lausanne with Eric Garcetti and a bunch of other guys, he brought home the Olympic Games together with the rest for Los Angeles 2028, which is pretty darn cool. We want to understand what is the Olympic movement, because it's been around a long time, and who in the devil was the guy that started all that. And if you want a deeper introduction into that gentleman, you have to read George's book called The Idealist, which we will be able to sign at the end. But please give a warm welcome to my good friend, George Hirthler. Welcome to Frog Talk.
Thank you, Scott. That was beautiful. Beautiful introduction. In 21 days, in Lima, Peru, the International Olympic Committee will formally award the 2024 and 2028 Olympic Games to two of the world's greatest cities, Paris and Los Angeles. It's an unprecedented double award. And the fact of the matter is, the Games are coming back to the United States. The United States in 11 years. It's going to happen in 21 days. I'll get back to that. I want to talk to you, though, about the Olympic movement itself, because it's a story I don't think you've heard. It's about the values this movement embodies, and it's all about It is all about what this movement really means to our world. The fact of the matter is, you can make a good argument that the Olympic movement is the most successful movement of the 20th century. It survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, terrorism, political boycotts, you'll remember those, doping, huge doping, and multiple scandals of all sorts, corruption of various kinds. And yet it outpaced the United Nations historically in the growth of its member states, which today numbers 206. 3.5 billion people, that's half the world's population, tune in to watch every edition of the Olympic Games. They tune in to watch the new heroes emerge from all around the world and establish new standards of human performance, generation after generation. But there's one story of heroes that they never hear, and that's the story of the founder of the Olympic movement, Baron Pierre de Coubertin. If you Googled the 10 most influential people out of the 19th century, you'd get a list something like this. All famous, wonderful people, some of whom left great legacies, some left destructive legacies. And yet the founder of the most successful movement of the 20th century never shows up because the International Olympic Committee never tells its origin story, never tells you the story of Baron Pierre de Coubertin. So he remains an unknown genius to us today. He's the founder of the most successful movement of the 20th century, but also a man who created a movement that literally unites our world in friendship and peace through sport as nothing else has. And for that reason alone, we should know who he is. And I'm going to tell you his story today. He was born in Paris on January 1, 1863, which happens to be the same day that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Now that's purely a coincidence, but the fact is Coubertin spent his entire life and his family fortune liberating people through sport. He was born into the aristocracy, and yet as a young man, he turned his back on the monarchy and embraced the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity in the Third Republic. Coubertin became a man of the people. When Coubertin was 8, living in Paris, the Franco-Prussian War broke out, and the Germans made swift work of the French army and pretty soon put a siege around Paris, starving out the 200,000 residents who were inside the walled city, forcing them to eat all the animals of the city, all their horses, their beloved horses, and even the elephants in the zoo. The violence left a deep scar in the psyche of this young boy. But when he was 11, a new source of hope arrived as the Germans began an excavation that lasted 6 years of ancient Olympia. Olympia had been lost to humanity for 15 centuries, and it was buried in 15 feet of silt. But out of the ground suddenly came 130 statues, 40 monuments, 6,000 coins, 13,000 small bronze icons, and Hermes of Praxiteles, one of the greatest sculptures in history, described by Pausanias as in the Temple of Hera in the 2nd century BC, which is right where the Germans found it. Europe went into a frenzy for the classical world. The imagination of our young protagonist, Baron Pierre de Coubertin, however, was struck by a different notion. He saw that in the ancient world, sport had the power to produce peace in a time of war between warring states. And he was gripped by the idea that this great foundation society of Western civilization, ancient Greek civilization, which gave us, of course, philosophy, astronomy, geometry, zoology, we could keep going on, democracy, it gave us all of those things. Coubertin understood that to that ancient civilization, nothing was more important than the Olympic Games. For 1,200 years, the truce of the gods produced peace across the celebration of the Games. At the age of 20, Coubertin was a major player in the French educational reform movement. He traveled to dozens of prep schools and universities in Britain and 29 colleges and universities in New York. He was right here in the United States. As a result, he was convinced that what French children needed more than anything else was something that the Brits and the Americans already had, gym class. And so he began to work with 100 schools in France to build physical education into their curriculum. And as he did, he began to see the possibilities of international sport and the promotion of international sport. In 1889, at the Paris Universal Exposition, where the Eiffel Tower was introduced to the world, Coubertin saw also the powerful promotional potential of global events. And these things started to work in his imagination. At that expo, he organized an international congress on physical education and aligned it very closely with the first Universal Congress on World Peace. If you check your history, that's the birth of the modern peace movement. The IOC was formed on June 23, 1894, when Coubertin proposed the restoration of the Games before 2,000 people in the from 13 countries in the Sorbonne in Paris, France. Athens was elected to host the 1896 Games. Paris took the 1900 Games, and a movement of sport and peace was born under the patronage of the peace movement at the time. In fact, in the room that night, 6 of the first 13 Nobel Peace Prize winners were present with Coubertin supporting his vision. That tells you how this movement was born out of the peace movement and how related they were. Yet you never hear any of this. You don't hear any of this when you watch the Games. You think of it as only as a sporting event. Coubertin said this at the time: "We shall not have peace until the prejudices which now separate our different nations shall have been outlived. To attain this end, what better means than to bring the youth of all countries periodically together for amicable trials of muscular strength and agility." If you think about it today, the conflict and the prejudices that have emerged again, this message is more relevant than ever, making the Olympic movement a movement that is essential to the future of humanity. Since he was the chief ideologue of the Olympic movement and its lead writer, wrote 60,000 pages in his life, he started to shape a philosophy of life called Olympism. Now, Olympism moves from the personal to the universal. It links human excellence to world peace through a ladder of values that everyone can live out in their own lives. And he was a genius in doing that. But by the end of his life, he guided the first 7 organizational efforts, guided the organization of the first 7 Olympic Games. By the end of his life, he was living as a broken man, living on the hospitality of the city of Lausanne in Switzerland, where the IOC is still headquartered this day, and depressed because he believed his great movement for peace had failed in its larger purpose, because the Nazis had taken over the organization of his 1936 Games, and they were beating the drums of hatred and racism and war behind the spectacular pageantry that he had created. And yet, on the field of play in Berlin, Coubertin's philosophy of friendship and peace through sport took hold in a miraculous way. Jesse Owens, the grandson of an Alabama slave who was destined personally to disprove Hitler's theory of Aryan supremacy, formed a bond of friendship with Luz Long, who was the greatest long jumper at the time in Germany. You've probably heard the story. Jesse Owens comes out in his first competition, wins the gold in the 100 meters. Next day, he puts his sweats on. He runs out on the track to warm up for the long jump, goes down the long jump run and runs through the pit, the sand pit, and the judges yell, "Foul!" And he says, "I wasn't jumping." They said, "Nope, you were jumping, that's a foul." Strips off his sweats, runs down, and does foul. One more foul, and the greatest long jumper in the world is out of the competition. At that point, Luz Long comes up to him, puts his arm around him, and says, "Jesse, you're nervous. Settle down. Do what my teammates and I do. Put a white towel down a foot behind the takeoff mark and jump from there. You'll easily qualify." Jesse Owens did exactly as Luz Long recommended, jumped, won the gold medal. Luz Long, who was under direct orders from Hitler to win at all costs, took the silver. At the end of his life, Jesse Owens wrote in his biography, this is 30 years later, and he stayed in touch with Luz Long's family all the way through that period of time. Luz Long was killed in the Battle of the Bulge. Awards are become tarnished and diplomas fade. Championships are mythical things. They have no permanence. What is a gold medal? A trinket? A bauble? What counts, my friends, are the realities of life, the fact of competition, and yes, the great and good friends you make. That is really a remarkable statement from a tremendous hero. Coubertin's legacy lives on in thousands of untold stories like that one. As Juan Antonio Samaranch, who's the president of the IOC, said, "We pursue one ideal, that of bringing people together in peace, irrespective of race, religion, and political convictions for the benefit of mankind." Coubertin couldn't have said it any better. What's so amazing about this, that's a description of the Olympic movement. It does not use the word sport. Now, getting back to Paris 2024 and London 2028, I'm hoping that both of those organizing committees, which are going to produce new models of an organizational effort for the IOC to solve some of the problems that it's facing right now. Host city costs have spiraled out of control. In LA, will bring them back under control, and we're hoping that Paris will too. But what I'd like to see out of both of those cities is better storytelling. What I'd like to see out of both of those cities is a revitalization of this movement. I would like to see them take this origin story of Baron Pierre de Coubertin and put it right at the front of everything they're doing and everything they say. So the world can begin to realize that the Olympic Games are about far more than sport. And at the same time, they can realize that there's a movement behind those games that is in fact holds more hope and promise for a world than just about anything else. So, one of the things Scott said is we should draw lessons. We should draw lessons from these talks. And here's the lesson to all the other movements that are represented in the room tonight and all the other movements you're going to start. Never, ever take your eye off your origin story. Never, ever stop telling the world about the values that your movement embodies. And as a closing commercial, please buy my book.
Thank you, George. We're actually going to move this little fella so we don't have any animal cruelty. It's a safe spot. Why is it important to help the underprivileged have access to education? What does it mean to them? And what does it say about us? To answer those questions, I'd like to invite Yvette Cook up to the stage. Yvette runs Usher's New Look. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Yvette a warm welcome.
Well, hello and welcome. This is really a pleasure for me to be here with you guys today. I really consider myself a humanitarian. For my whole entire life, I've been dedicated to working and serving others that were underserved. And right now, I'm on a mission to really help with this whole thing called generational poverty that a lot of people really don't want to talk about. And at the crux of that, I'm working with an organization called Usher's New Look that's been around for 18 years doing phenomenal work specifically with youth. So this movement that I'm going to talk to you about today is really all about transforming mindsets, transforming the mindsets of youth who right now are in the midst of a crisis. Let me talk to you about that for a moment. More than 1 million students drop out of school every single year annually. And if you're black or you're brown, you're 6 times more likely to drop out of high school and not finish. And then from a sheer population perspective, this is a big number, but more than 45 million Americans live at or below poverty. So what's that threshold? For a family of one, $11,550 annually. Family of 4, about $24,550 annually. For 4 people, that's what they're living off of. It's very, very challenging. And the reason that it's so important that we really help our youth in this crisis is because if we don't do it today, we're going to pay for it eventually. The prison pipeline is really set by youth who don't have the same access and exposure to fill themselves or to pull themselves out of their positions. So one of the wonderful, amazing things that I get to do every single day is to work with youth to impact their lives, to show them that there is an alternative. So how do we do this? Well, it's not easy transforming mindsets. Because if you think about it, if someone has told you from the time you were a little bitty that you're not smart, you're never going to amount to anything, you're never going to be anything other than what you are, that's what you've always heard, that's what you always believe. So we come into the lives of students when they're about 8th grade, before they go into high school, and a lot of our kids tell us, it's not about if I drop out, it's when I drop out. So we're trying to get in front of them before they've made that final decision to drop out of school. So at the middle of this transformation guideline that we use, or hierarchy, education really is the key. Education is centrally important. So let me throw a few numbers at you. 80% of prisoners right now today, 80% of them do not have a GED or did not finish college, okay? And in California, I think the number is about 23% are completely illiterate. And on average, most prisoners on average have an 8th grade education. So for every student that we're able to put through this transformation, that's one less student to break into your car, your business, to rob you on the street corner. And this one less person that we all eventually end up paying for when they go into the prison pipeline. So how do we do this work? Well, there are many amazing organizations out there doing work like what we're doing, and we just take a non-traditional approach. So what we do is we start with students around the 8th grade, and we help them identify their spark, their passion. What gets you up in the morning? What can you do all day long and never tire of doing? Now, most of the time, believe it or not, these kids know what that is. Sometimes they don't, and we help them figure out what that is. Because what we've demonstrated is if a student can see relevancy in school and make a connection, then they stay in school. I'll give you a story. We had a young man who was interested, he wanted to work on the NASCAR circuit. He wanted to be a NASCAR mechanic. So what do? We took him out to a track and we let him spend the whole entire day with the NASCAR team. At the end of the day, he was just beaming. He was like, this is exactly what I want to do. He said, but I get now why I have to work on getting my math grades up, because how am I going to be able to calculate the velocity of the speed of the car to know what tire ratings to put on it if I don't learn my math? So this young man was a junior at the time. He went back to school. He finished high school, and while he was a senior in high school, he went to a technical college where he learned how to work on cars. When he graduated high school, he got a job. He now lives in North Carolina, and he's working with the NASCAR team. That's one example of many. I could go on and on and on, but the spark we have found is truly a key, an important key to changing the mindset. One of the other things that we found to be extremely valuable is a concept called peer-to-peer. So in all of the trainings, in all of the speaking, in all of the curriculum and the courses, there's never an adult standing in front of the students teaching them anything. It's their peers. It's their peers who've already matriculated through the program, who are exactly where they used to be, maybe only 2, 3, or 4 years ago, and they go, oh, so you were here 3 years ago. I remember you when I first came into high school, and now you're, oh, a sophomore in college? Oh, now you're the global ambassador of youth and you're traveling the world? So it's instant credibility, instant connectivity, and now youth see themselves becoming something more than they ever thought they could be. So those are kind of the keys of what we do. And along the pathway, we really, really push service and how critically important it is. You must reach back and bring others up. And that really is about the work that we do. There are many youth organizations out here that are doing amazing things. We're just one of many. And so what I'm going to encourage you to do is get involved. Because I always believe you start the beginning with the end in mind. And at the end of the day, we want our outcomes to be strong and powerful. We want our kids to see themselves differently. We want their self-efficacy to be lifted up. We want them to think there's nothing that I can't do because we've exposed them. And now they've become aware of a plethora of things that they can do that fall within an area that they're passionate about, something that they want to do, not something that the teacher thinks I should do or that my parents think I should do, but what am I excited about doing? So at the end of this process, what do we get? We get kids that think differently, they speak differently, they act differently, they behave differently. As opposed to looking for a gang to join, they look for a community organization to volunteer with. Many of the students actually are entrepreneurs who've started their own businesses before they've gotten out of college. Some of them have started their own nonprofits. It's been so wildly successful that we've coined this term called disruptivator. And we hope that we're building a whole new generation of disruptivators. It's simply a young person on a mission to make the world a better place. So I invite you all to join us Join this movement. And if you're sitting there and you're thinking, you know, I really want to do something, but I'm not sure how to get started, call me, email me. I'd be happy to introduce you to an organization in your community. And then the second thing I'm going to ask you to do is expose a student, even if it's just one student. Take that student into your world. Let them see what you do. Expose them to your company and let them have access to a world that they ordinarily would have never had access to. So I'm going to leave you with this quote. Nelson Mandela, to me, is one of the greatest men of all time. And I think he put it the best. Education really is the greatest weapon we have to make change in the world. So thank you for allowing me to tell you about what I'm doing, and I'd love to have a conversation with you afterwards. Thank you.
Yvette Cook, thank you so much. So we are going to have a brief break. Enjoy a few moments of drink and a few moments of mingling. And while you're doing that, you will have another little treat. We have an extraordinary musician with us tonight. His name is Nathan Ehrenfeld, who's also a good friend, who is going to be playing some acoustic music downstairs. So have a listen, mingle, enjoy, and come back in about 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and we are back live at the Frog Talks inaugural event here in New York City on Madison Avenue. I don't know if anybody had a chance to look outside the windows here, but if anyone is into architecture, there is an extraordinary installation over there. You have some of the most beautiful buildings in America. You have the Flatiron Building, of course, that was built in the late 1800s. You have this building at the corner, which was the tallest building in the world for a very short period of time. At the beginning of the 1900s, you have the big Sony/Credit Suisse building that was supposed to be the biggest building in the world and was capped in 1929. And then you have this new building, this new innovative feels like a single plot of land building, which houses none other than Rupert Murdoch and Jerry Hall at the very top. So you can either boo, hiss, or applaud. It's up to you. So now we are back, and I would like to take a second to thank Nathan. Where are you, Nathan? Thank you so much. It was beautiful. So now we're going to talk about a topic which is important in today's world, which is leadership. In a world where we wonder, is there any leadership left? How do we look to the future and be a leader? What do we have to think about? What's important and what isn't? And to talk about that is a lady who is truly inspiring, who I've had the pleasure to know for many years, and has written or co-written a book called The Leadership Mind Switch, and is going to spend some time talking about it now with us. So welcome to the stage, Kylie Wright Ford. Bravo. And I'm going to give you a clicker.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. I'm glad to be here. Before I start my frog talk, I wanted to tell you a few things personal about myself. So the relevance of these moments that I share with you will become apparent later, but let's just go with it for the moment. So I'm Kylie. As Scott mentioned, I was born in Australia on a sheep farm, actually, way out west of Sydney. Just 5,000 sheep, my family and I. So I've lived in a few places. Most recently, I live in Atlanta, so down in the south. But I'm from the deep south, where I grew up in Canberra and Brisbane. I ended up in Oxford to do my MBA and then moved to London, got transferred to New York, And so I've lived in a couple of different places. They've all shaped who I am. I'm married, wonderful guy, 16 years. He's Australian also, and we have 2 children of our own, 6 and 16, and I have a wonderful stepdaughter. She's 23. I don't have a job, although like many, I need an income and healthcare. I don't drive a car, but I live in Atlanta, so work that out, because anyone who's been there knows it's horrific from a traffic perspective. So I subscribe to Clutch.com. It's an on-demand service. You get to have a Jeep one week, a Mercedes the next week, a Corvette the week after. So that's a little bit about me. How I earn my income is I freelance for 3 or 4 different companies that inspire me. I select them carefully. And I'm on my 3rd one-year sabbatical in the last 15 years. So I do have serious jobs from time to time. 8 years, 7 years, and most recently I was Chief Operating Officer of a company based in Atlanta. So what does all this mean? It means I have the work ethic of a boomer. I have the desire of freedom like a Gen X. I have the passion for technology, Clutch.com, etc., of a Gen Y or a millennial. And I have the attention span of our little friend right here, the Gen Z. Let's park all of this and let's move on for a second. So I co-authored this book called The Leadership Mind Switch based on observations from my own career. So I spent 10 years working in executive networks where we curate communities of executives for the idea exchange purpose. And I observed a couple of things. The world is moving very fast. Leadership teams are not moving fast enough. My frog talk is to every leader in the room, and whether you're leading an initiative, a program, a family, a movement, a company, or a country, this is a call to you to actually think about whether you're moving as fast as the world around you, or whether you're harboring legacy thinking, whether you're that boss that cares about FaceTime, whether you're that Luddite that is not embracing technology fast enough, and make a mind switch if you're one of those. Just as yesterday we had light turn into night, that's the mind switch idea. And actually it's beautiful to talk straight after Pauline because she introduced my talk perfectly about the Industrial Revolutions. So we're currently in the 4th Industrial Revolution, and she set me up perfectly. We didn't even collaborate, but we're currently in the 4th Industrial Revolution. First one, steam engine, etc. Second one, mass production. Third one, digital, as we spoke about. Fourth is a fusion of technologies, physical, biological, and digital. The Fitbit is the best, easiest example of this. And it's really big. So we are currently moving, according to McKinsey, who are far smarter than me collectively, at 300 times the scale of the first Industrial Revolution. Wow. Now, sure, it might have been 300 years ago, but even just go back 50 to 100 years, are our leadership teams and other people you work with, are you moving at 300 times the scale of you folks who started the first Industrial Revolution? Or are we inching along, still hosting those boring meetings, still using the same software, still relying on FaceTime as a measure for how you lead your people? The big difference in the 4th Industrial Revolution is demographics and technology. The leadership mind switch is about how these things are affecting the way that we lead. They're the 2 biggest changes. 50% of the workforce is going to be millennials. We've probably heard that by 2020, just a few years away. And they're bringing incredible welcome and unwelcome changes, depends where you are. And we have technologies now that enable us in all kinds of ways. Eric Schmidt said that every 2 days we create as much information as we did from the dawn of mankind to 2003. Information is not a differentiator anymore. Creativity and judgment and the human element is what is the differentiator now. But are leaders keeping up? Are we keeping up? Global leadership is a roll-up of all of our leadership. It's just like everything else. You only end up with the results at the top that you expect by being the best leader that you can be. So I want to highlight one characteristic that we mention in the book of 4 and one behavior of 4. that we mention in the book. The characteristic I chose tonight is based on where we are, I think, in the world right now. I chose enlightenment. Enlightened leaders are super curious. They find the person that kind of challenges them and makes them scared. They hire at the most diverse possible population that they can find. They read things that challenge them, and they never come in with legacy thinking, biases, or prejudices about the person they're walking into the room with. Enlightened leaders make for a better workplace because they bring out the best and they can relate to everyone across generations and styles. That is the key here. The mastery, the skill that we need to master, in my view, in this revolution, I've already adopted the revolution term, is that of leading across generations and styles, not just generations. So effective leaders are known more by the questions they ask than the answers they give. This is true of enlightened leaders. They're not sitting giving you a directive because information is a commodity, as we saw with the quote with Eric Schmidt. They're asking the question because they hire people smarter than them and ask smart questions. So the behavior I mentioned is dynamic. I mentioned demographics and technology advances are the big differences in this fourth industrial revolution. And so what that has done in the workplace of the future has shifted the power from employers to employees. The freelance economy is here. It is not going anywhere. If you're in a traditional company and you're still using the same hiring methods and hiring the same people and doing the same things you've done for the last 20 years, and as a side note, I watched Office Space for the first time the other night on a flight from Boston as part of a research, and I was laughing hysterically, not because it was that funny, but because it could have personified so many experiences. Just yesterday, a report came out about 1 in 6 people hating their jobs by 35. We just haven't moved that far, which is really, really sad. So 54 million people in the US have chosen the freelance economy, and they're not just drivers or people who deliver things, if that's what you think they are, or people who create things or engineers. I'm one of those people, and I have 20 years experience in knowledge professions. So things have really changed. And if you're a leader who relies on people to help your movement, company, country, world, then you need people to work for you. And increasingly they're opting out based on this legacy thinking and the things that we're doing that really annoy them. So we have a couple of choices here, and I started by talking about myself and a few personal things about me. And the point of that was, I hope you saw that I was making the point where working down this path of trying to identify people by when they were born. We're entering the workforce earlier. We're leaving the workforce later due to technology. Demographics have changed. People are complex. The skill to master is leading across generations and styles if you really want to make an impact. And the people I admire most of all is that those of I have met during my career is people like this, that actually are as enlightened as you can possibly be and really make a big impact. Thank you for your time. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Kylie. So, over to the east, past the concrete, past the roads, and the buildings, and the architecture, there's a water, big water. There's a bay, the Great South Bay. Why does saving the Great South Bay matter, Marshall? Maybe you could tell us. Come on up, please. Give Marshall a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Well, thank you, Scott and StrawberryFrog, for inviting me here. The talks so far have been really wonderful, and look forward to telling you our origin story first. It was my 35th high school reunion some 5 years ago. We just moved back to Long Island. I've been away for 35 years, but went off to college. But we moved back to Long Island to raise our family. So I come back to my hometown, and I walk to the end of the street where I grew up with my then 11-year-old son, and we got into the bay, and we were there maybe half a second because the water was so, it's coffee colored. It was gross, and it wasn't at all the bay I'd remembered. So that night at our reunion, that's all we could talk about, because we come from all over the country to be back, and a lot of had seen the bay, and we couldn't believe it. So we vowed right there and then that we were going to do something about it, and so there was born Save the Great South Bay. That was 12 weeks to the day before Sandy. So Save the Great South Bay today has some 12,000 people in it from communities all over the South Shore, whether it's, I don't know if any of these names are familiar to you, Babylon, Patchogue, Bayshore, Bellport, Blue Point, Amityville, some 30 towns, and all deeply historically connected to that bay. Our mission is to restore the bay so that we can swim, fish, clam, sail as we have for generations. But it's going to be a lot of work, as you'll see soon. There we go. Can a beer save the bay? Well, I think you'll see it just may. But before we get to that question, we really need to first look at the problems that are facing the bay. So there it is, the collapse of clamming. This represents the three towns, Babylon, Islip, and Brookhaven. So there about 1976, we have 700,000 bushels of clams coming out of the bay. That's half of all the hard-shell clams eaten in this country for generations, and generations came out of that bay. Until we hit 1985, and it basically falls off a cliff. Well, why? Because we have a nitrogen problem in the bay, and it's causing these massive algal blooms. That's the brown tide there, rust tide here, red tide here, anoxic places there where the algae has basically depleted the area of oxygen, creating these dead zones. It is a catastrophe of epic proportions, and it's something that a lot of people really don't know about. So there it is, the biggest environmental crisis you never heard about. And what's causing it? Well, 500,000 cesspools and septic tanks in sandy soil. 26% of Nassau County is unsewered. 74% of Suffolk County is unsewered. And what happens? That nitrogen leaching out of the septic tanks goes into the groundwater, and it's like fertilizer. It hits the bay, and the algae goes crazy. And then with the brown tide, what happened was it obscured the bay bottom for a couple months, and all the eelgrass died, all the habitat for the clams and fish. And that was it. 6,000 people working the bay lost their livelihoods overnight. So what is Save the Great South Bay doing about this? Well, there are some 42 creeks that flow into the Great South Bay along the South Shore. So we established this Creek Defender program so that each creek would have its own local steward, and from the 12,000 people in our group, they are volunteering for cleanups. For instance, this Hardy Bunch here, they pulled out 28 car tires and 2 shopping carts within 2 hours. That was one group of 10 out of the 8 that we had for Earth Day in Babylon when we launched the Creek Defender program. Then there's the I Love Long Island campaign. We also launched that on Earth Day. We have now some 30 organizations, environmental organizations from all over Long Island, and the message is very simple. Anything that you put on your lawn ends up one of two places: in the bay or in your drinking water. Long Island also has a unique situation where we live on top of our drinking water. It's a sole source aquifer left by the glaciers. A lot of people on Long Island don't know that either. And then this is my favorite of our 3 initiatives because it can both rescue the bay and restore the economy. this is what happens when you leave oysters in a filthy, algae-infested fish tank for a day. One oyster can filter 30 gallons of water a day. And so what would happen if you had 5,000 acres of oysters? Well, according to one scientist, that would solve 147% of the nitrogen problem. And every acre of oysters can yield $100,000 of revenue a year. So there's a $500 million industry, and you clean the bay. So that's what we're trying to get to, if we can get the water quality good enough that's possible. And here's how, in part, we will be able to support these 3 initiatives. I will tell the story now of the origin of Drink the Bay Clean. For years, I'd wanted a beer for our nonprofit. I like beer, first of all. And I'm really bad at asking for money. So I figured if we had a beer to support the org, that would be great. Well, these things are a lot easier said than done, and very complicated. It's a great idea in theory, but how is it all put together? Well, it was then I decided I'd take a meeting with a gentleman who was here today, Mark Burford, who is the brewmaster emeritus and founder of Blue Point Brewery. And it was a meeting, I don't know what it was about, but because the first sentence he said, before we get started, I want you to know I'm making you your beer. And the man is true to his word. Here it is today. We can't keep it on the shelves. It's so good. It's an India Pale Lager, if you've ever had it. There you go. There you go. come to Papa. right. It's not only for a good cause, but it's really fantastic beer. So they can't make enough of it, but they're scaling production to meet the demand. And to your point earlier, Scott, this is absolutely something that we can take to other bays around the world, because one of the things that Mark did was he sold his brewery to InBev, which is the world's largest beer maker and distributor. And there's certainly bays around the world. I don't know how many beers have actually been made for an environmental cause, but this is it, and I think that this model should and ought to be replicated. So now I would just like to invite you all to help us out by drinking the Bay Clean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marshall. I and I think everyone else looks forward to tasting your beer later after our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to answer the question, is the glass ceiling relevant anymore? And with that, I'd like to bring up on stage Holly Lynch.
Just to explain the outfit, it's not just that I love Wonder Woman. I am here to represent all the Wonder Women who have allowed me to be here tonight. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. I don't know if that's an African proverb. Erica told me it isn't. But for me, it's a truth. And it's a truth I've lived with the help of many friends, but especially the men and women who have worked, marched, run, and strived through cancer with me. They're the reason why I'm here. And I believe that 3 is the most perfect collective number. 3 is company, 3 times a charm, and the third wheel on a tricycle actually is the most essential. It's also the number I believe is essential to start a cultural movement and to end a cultural movement. Fittingly, 2017 has been a banner year for 3s. 3.3 million people marched around the world on January 21st, 2017 in support of the third Women's March on Washington. Soon after that, 3 male media moguls were taken down for sexual assault: Bill Cosby, Bill O'Reilly, and Roger Ailes. Then we had 3 male-led tech companies come under scrutiny for ethical misbehavior: Uber, Facebook, and AngelList. And then we had our 3 women GOP senators stand up and say, no, you can't repeal the Affordable Care Act without a replacement, because they had not come to Washington to hurt people. And for me, it's my third chance at life. So what connects all of these incidents? Women uniting, coming together in strength and in numbers against the adversity of institutions that have kept them on the outside. We are the third women's movement. We are the strivers. We are includers. We are finding strength in our numbers and unity in our diversity. We've recently been called the Xennials, a microgeneration. They didn't know they exist, but we are outside the norm. We are fueled by social media, by economic ambition, by higher education, and a greater willingness to share struggles, pain, strength, and the ability to help each other. We no longer seek to oust each other for that one position. We have worked together to include each other like a village to go further together. Our igniting point was when we got to college. It was the 90s, and there were 3 women, 3 of many, but 3 women, who stood out for us: Oprah Winfrey, Madeleine Albright, and Hillary Clinton. And they said to us, don't fight alone, fight together, support each other, get more seats at the table, don't oust each other out. And we followed their instructions, because women's rights are human rights. In 2005, we galvanized around another really powerful number: 2. 2% of women around the world considered themselves beautiful. And we had a mission: supporting another pioneering woman out of Brazil. An entirely female team of 20 and 30-somethings from New York, Chicago, London, Dusseldorf, and Sao Paulo led the Dove campaign for real beauty, to support the 98% of women who should feel beautiful every single day. We got a bunch of awards, but the most important thing that we did was we changed the hearts and minds of girls and their parents forever. And we also rocked the beauty industry to its core. Soon after that, young women around the world like Malala stood up and got shot by the Taliban. And women understood the importance of equal rights for all. Then Facebook and other social media platforms gave women everywhere the capacity to take down brands like Pampers. I worked on it, I know. And GoDaddy, because they didn't believe in the missions that they were being sold. And they knew that their voices and their dollars couldn't be ignored anymore, because 85% of consumer spending in this country is done by women. Which of course brings us back to 2016 and 17. Regardless of Russian meddling, or whether or not you like Hillary Clinton, the truth is in the numbers. Nearly 3 million more people voted for her. And the result of that election took much of this country and the world into mourning, because it meant that misogyny, racism, disrespect, absolute disregard for human rights had just been elected into office. And frankly, a whole bunch of white guys could still pull those exclusivity strings. Not surprisingly, the very next day, 3 women got on Skype with a bunch of friends, and they started planning the March on Washington. Karen, where's Karen? She's somewhere in here. Karen, she actually tagged me on Facebook and a bunch of my colleagues. She's had the nerve. She's like, you guys gotta go, you gotta lead this. And I was like, it's on Facebook, you gotta do it. So I was like, okay. what do? So I got a bus. And my Reverend Mother Lyles is here, too. And in the early hours of January 21st, 2017, we got on that bus. It was pre-dawn. Our bus was late, but we got on the bus. We had our coffee. We had our comfortable shoes. We had our clear backpacks stuffed with snacks. We had no idea what to expect. But the resounding response we got in the US and around the world was profound.
No, he's not even going to have a brief honeymoon. The very first day of his presidency is marked by an international wave of protests that is historic.
It's a protest against misogyny, it's a protest against the rise of fascism in Western politics. We're protesting for inclusiveness and equality, and that's really what today is all about.
Exactly, and we want to send a sign to the women in the US that we're all in this together.
Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
For the record, not a single person was killed, arrested, or even hurt that day. But what we didn't understand at the time was that there was a counter movement moving against us in the margins, deep in the margins. And nearly 6 months later, on August 2017, that counter movement of white nationalists and supremacists erupted onto the streets of Charlottesville. Sorry, I get very emotional at this point because it's just a couple weeks ago. The result was that their hate, their violence, their aggression injured many people and caused the death of one young woman. That young woman was out there fighting for inclusion, fighting for the voices of all of us that had gone unheard in the election.
My child's famous Facebook post was, "If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention." She paid attention. She made a lot of us pay attention.
Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old killed in Charlottesville last weekend by a suspected white nationalist, was remembered on Wednesday for a relentless passion for fighting injustice.
She was a firm believer in whatever she believed, and let's do that. Let's find that spark of conviction. Let's find in ourselves that action. Let's spread this. Let's have the uncomfortable dialogue. It ain't easy sitting down and saying, well, why are you upset?
Her mother, Susan Breaux, addressed the hundreds of mourners packed into a Charlottesville theater, many of them wearing purple, her favorite color.
And I think the reason that what happened to Heather has struck a chord is because we know that what she did is achievable.
Ladies and gentlemen, what she did is achievable. There are 3 generations in this room right now and watching online. Isla, where are you? Isla. I think Jun Chang is here and Alessandro Biaggi is here. The point is we have 3 young women, 3 women of the up-and-coming generation. And I'm telling you right now, I know you're awake. I know you're active. But your millennial generation is woefully asleep and apathetic. You need to tell them to wake up. get out of bed, get their noses out of their apps, their devices, their avocado toast, and their virtual reality. Because the real world needs them now. The environment is real. Healthcare is real. Education is real. Infrastructure is real. Jobs are real. And they need to stop wasting their time. All right? They need to tell their friends to stop whining about Trump and start doing something about it. Better yet, talk to that friend they think actually voted for him and ask why. Because Trump is not the problem. He's a symptom of a divide that is centuries old, and the infection that fed the divide is even older. That infection is the infection of them or us, and that infection needs to end with you. And the rest of my speaker friends and my peers and the audience here, you have as much of a job to do as they do. Because you have influence, you have character, you have ethics, you have understanding. And you know that the third women's movement isn't about women or men, black or white, Jew or Christian, rich or poor, old or young. It's about all of us. So stop using those useless labels. Instead, I had a thought this morning. Think like the Friends. Think like the Quakers. Think like the people who reach out to strangers and say, yes, I'll keep you safe. Come into my house. Be my friend. And when you've embodied that friend mentality, go to Facebook and refriend all the people you unfriended after the election. And when you've done that, pick up the phone, call that friend and say, hey friend, I'm hosting Shabbat this Friday. Join me. Or I'm hosting Sunday brunch. Join me. Or a barbecue. Or a walk in the park. And if that friend says yes, be civil. Don't be superior. Keep the conversation going. And then, if the conversation's going, I want you to listen. Really listen and hear them and understand. Because really, if all of us do that, we will finish the 3 centuries old dream of all of us coming together with equality and unity, and that ironically started in Charlottesville. So let's do that. Let's all come together. Let's fight for our mutual equality. And let's end this third women's movement with a movement for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. I hope you've enjoyed this evening as much as I have. The speakers have been extraordinary. We are going to cut the cord in the back, and we are going to have this launch of the movement to drink the bay clean. So I invite you all to come and mingle and enjoy us, and Marshall will lead us in the cracking open of our first 200 cans of Drink the Bay Clean. So with that, I'd like to say, first of all, thank everyone for joining us here tonight. I'd also like to say a special thank you to all the Strawberry Frog team who really made a huge success of this evening, made all of us look great. Really, the place was awesome, and I look forward to seeing everyone here for our next installment. Thank you.